How fields work. The smallest objects in nature must be as dynamic as strings in our macro world are. A free subatomic string, not being a part of a subatomic particle and not propagating in space, has both ends free, and so should look like a spinning hourglass. Since a string is a real object at the smallest mic level, some free strings should be everywhere in the universe, even in a vacuum. They have only rotational momentum, spin, because do not travel. Subatomic particles are comprised of sets of strings. The surfaces have one end free, and logically they must create string vortexes when spinning. A neutron surface consists of free strings with both orientations of vortexes, arranged alternately up and down. This is why the neutron has no net force effect. A vortex in the macro world has a force effect on surrounding objects, and so does a subatomic string vortex. A vortex funnel pulls a nearby vortex stem into it. When vortexes have the same orientation, they repel each other, as electric charges do. When the positive charge is near to the free string, the spinning hourglass switches to the vortex directed by its cone to the charge. When the minus charge is near, the hourglass shape changes to the vortex directed by its stem to the charge. The changes run in time and therefore there is dynamics. Although there are no subatomic particles in the space around electric charges, the transition of an electric force runs through the region due to the presence of scattered strings there. String vortexes, directed by their stems to negative charges, create electric field lines around a negative charge. When the charge switches from minus to plus, nearby strings, as they would be on the first shell to the charge, start to reconstruct their shape. They move their nodes farthest from the charge. As the nodes on the strings of the first shell move to the outer side from the electric charge, they push the nodes on the strings of the second shell toward the middle. Thus, the strings of the first shell become string vortexes having a charge, and strings on the second shell are in the shape intrinsic to free strings. Strings on the second shell finish their transfer. Their stems influence the strings on the third shell, causing them to relocate their nodes away from the charge. Strings on the third shell finish their transfer, and strings on the fourth shell transit their nodes to the middle, as the strings on the fourth shell finish their transfer, and so influence nearby strings to change their shape, and so on. When the positive charge changes to a negative, the strings again respond to it by adjusting their shapes to this new charge. First, those on the first shell transform from a vortex to an interim shape that is intrinsic to their free state, a rotating hourglass. As the strings on the first shell relocate their positive effect to the negative charge on the particle, their relocated negative effect influences the strings on the second shell to bring their positive effect to the first shell. Strings on the second shell finish their transfer to strings having the positive effect directed to the charged particle, and their negative effect causes strings on the third shell to start the relocation of their electric effects as well. Strings on the third shell finish the transfer of the electrical effect from the positive to negative in the direction to the particle's charge, and strings on the fourth shell start to transfer their electric effects. Strings on the fourth shell finish their transfer, and so influence nearby strings to change their shapes and thus their electric influence in the region of the charge, and so on. They stop transiting the electric effect when they reach a positive charge or meet a chain of approaching strings with a positive effect. Thus, we get the closed lines of an electrical field. The existence of these dynamics in space due to changed charges became physical phenomena in times when physical materialism knew only about macro objects. It is sad to realize that when science advanced to subatomic particles, and then to particles on the level of Planck size and Planck energy, field dynamics remained the materialistic phenomena for physicists. Some of them solved these phenomena by returning to a naive concept of our ancestors, that materialism is not a reason for our existence. Physicists, enlightened by the Hindu concept of existence, have produced theorems of fields known as the quantum physics of fields, where non-materialistic fields produce particles and forces, all existing in the universe. Science also has mathematical formulas for fields, and so on. Mathematics is the science that describes the existing quantities and relations among them, so there must be materialistic quantities. You saw in this animation how quantity behaves to maintain the dynamics of the electric force, even in a vacuum. You will find more about fields, strings bound in sets called subatomic particles, their force effects on their surfaces of those particles, as well as the behavior of those free strings having linear momentum and their interaction with strings on or inside subatomic particles, in my book Physical Model versus Standard Model.